Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Deepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Eric Deepen, and I am pastor of the Village Church in Tucson, Arizona. And across from me is Andy Littleton, pastor of Mission Church in Tucson, Arizona.
Indeed.
And we just did a podcast together.
Hey. Yay. So we're going to explain this question, so I won't go totally in depth, but we're addressing one of the emailed questions to us from Shannon from Canada. And it's a great question. And we are, basically getting into when you're accepting grace as a Christian, why then the expectation of obedience? So we'll state the question in more detail in just a moment, but thank you for tuning in. You. Enjoy the conversation. And don't forget to email us, faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com with your question.
And get that free book. Yeah.
Well, Eric, good morning. And we are addressing a question. We got another great question, and it comes from Shannon from Canada.
Shannon from Canada.
Yeah. So first of all, Shannon, thanks for tuning into the podcast. That means a lot to us. Really great to meet you over email. And you asked a great question. Eric, do you wanna tell us all what we're talking about today?
Yeah. Well, this kind of comes because we decided we would give away 5 of your books for free.
That's true.
People would email us, faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com.
So Shannon, your book has been signed and is sitting on the shipping pile.
It's sitting on the shipping pile. And Rick Joss, I suspect you'll be holding this book when you hear this podcast because yours gets dropped off in the mail on Tuesday, the last day of August.
Oh, there it is.
Anyway, Shannon emailed us, said, hey, I listened, and I've got a question, and I'm going to read her question directly from the email so that I don't mess it up or anything like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. How can God's grace be all-encompassing and freely given while still requiring us to obey God and live the Christian life? This question is one that non-Christians around me frequently ask, and one I have never felt I had a really solid answer to.
Excellent question.
I think it's a great question.
Yeah. And I think
it
comes up for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
We're just going to pitch this off. We have on the line a scholar, and it's just me and you.
just a couple little pastors from Tucson, Arizona. But and in true Faith Over Breakfast form now, form, this is not, we didn't put our heads together and do a study session. Look, we can do that. We can do that. But this is, if you were to ask us while lounging over at Alice's for a cup of coffee down the street, if you were just to ask this question, this is what you would get. That is the nature of our podcast. Every once in a while, I feel like I need to remind folks that this podcast is what it'd be like to sit down with a couple pastors over breakfast. So we could write the paper, we could give the speech. This is not that.
No.
This is us talking together about this. So that is the version you're going to get.
That's right.
So I haven't heard your explanation for this, Eric. You want to jump in on that?
I haven't heard yours either.
I know.
All right. Well, now that I have the email, let me remove my phone from the table.
We should have a sound bite that just pops in. It's like, remove your phone.
Remove your phone.
Anyway.
Oh, there we go. We made the sound bite.
Clip
okay. So this is so how can God's grace be given freely and with no requirement, and yet once embraced still require something, so to speak, is what she's asking.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the simple answer of all of this is that my first response is, well, I don't know if God's grace is freely given in my brain. And so here's what I mean by that.
Wow, you're getting controversial.
So let's get controversial. It wasn't. It cost something.
Right.
It cost Jesus.
Yes.
So it's given to me freely, but it's not free in the sense it cost Jesus his life in order to deliver that grace to me, that forgiveness, that relationship with the God
Yes.
and creator of me.
When you think of the free gift of grace, there you could think of a gift that somebody just went, like a re-gift, where they go, you know what, I've got this plant sitting in my house, and I'm just going to give it to you free. That's often how we can kind of unpurposefully trivialize grace. It's that simple. This is a gift given at the ultimate cost.
Yeah, and I think as a first world wealthy American, I tend to think of gifts. Go on Amazon, buy a gift. Mm-hmm. Go to Andy's list. Do you have
even that the cost list? The cost is that out of my spending budget, I decide to spend some. The cost is not costly. It's not one that demands. It doesn't cause me to suffer.
Right. Yeah. So grace, when I think about it, I mean, yes, I understand that it means an unmerited gift or an unmerited favor. But when I think about it, I think about 1 John 3:16, right? This is what we know love is, and this is my paraphrase. It's how we know what love is, that Christ laid his life down for us so that we can lay our lives down for others, that we should lay our lives down for others. Mm-hmm. That the gift I'm receiving is an actual taste and encounter of what love is supposed to be.
And then love by John is defined as obedience.
Yes. He obedience and identity. You're a child and you obey. And this is where I want to go with the why do you obey part, is that it is the obedience, or this is how you should live, is actually what grace looks like. Because grace says this is how you are going to best live life. These are this is my love, is to show you the way life is supposed to be lived and invite you to live that way. Mm-hmm. You're going to get the best out of life and out of your relationship with other people and out of your relationship with me. So I don't know if grace is love, then you just being able to do whatever you want is not love. Me saying, Andy, like, I love you for who you are and I've laid my life down for you. Now go do what you want. And whatever you want, and life will be great for you. No, love is for me saying, I lay my life down for you, and if you don't step into these things, your life's going to be miserable. Like, this is for you. It's not like for, here's a set of rules to control you, and so you can't have any fun, and you can't do anything good. And it's like, this is eternal life now and forevermore. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I was going to go especially with the child angle of it. Yeah. And I know both of us have preached out of 1 John not too long ago. So seeing you pull that from 1 John, I go, you've obviously steeped in it recently. And I'm currently in Galatians, and so I've got a lot of material on this lately from preaching. And so Shannon too, you could probably dig back in the 1 John archives of Eric Siepen and the Galatian archives of Mission Church and find some good working out of this stuff. But in Galatians, one of the big questions is, what's my relationship to God's law, I would say. And so the situation in that church is that people were coming in and trying to convince the Galatian Christians to be circumcised. And Paul is saying you should not do that. You should not return to being back under the law, and making the strong argument. And there a lot of people read that at face value or outside of the book itself and will say, see, you don't obey the law. But then he comes around, as happens in almost every one of the New Testament letters, and says, so we should live according to the Spirit. And the fruit of the Spirit are such things as love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control, gentleness. And there's no law that condemns these things. In other words, these are how you keep the law. And so there's a sense in which you're not under the law, you're called to this obedient life. And I get why that's complicated. And here's how I've been explaining it at Mission. And it comes from Paul's argument in the middle of the book, is your relationship to the law changes everything. So he, in the book, he uses the imagery of a Roman wealthy household. And there are 2 children in this house. One was born in bonded servitude. The other is the heir of the estate. And he says in that type of Roman household, both of these children would grow up under the rules of the house, under the laws, and they would learn how to do what was right. They would probably learn how to do tasks and such. But one of them is going to inherit all things, and one of them isn't. And he was saying that for all who are in Christ, your relationship to God the Father is you've been adopted in, you are children, you are heirs. And so when you look at the law, you don't look at it as things that restrain you. You look at it as the patterns of the one who's giving me everything, the ways of the one who's giving me everything. And so I explained it to our church in this way, more of a modern parallel. So I have a store, and we have an employee, and then we've discussed perhaps my daughter will work at the store someday. And of course, in our human experience, this can go dreadfully wrong, right? But if it's done really well and we treat her the same as we would treat any other employee, expect her to follow the employee handbook, show up on time, do her tasks, so on, she would experience the rules of the store the same as an employee would. But then at some point, we would leave the store to her and she would have freedom. But that freedom, if we did a good job, if we're good and loving and we had good patterns, her best use of that freedom would be to look back and say, I'm going to live out of how they shaped me, what they taught me. I'm going to live out their principles. And you see that in the best family businesses is people saying, I have taken this beautiful thing that my father built for me or my mother built for me, and I've carried on the legacy, right? And so now that doesn't explain every single little bit of why circumcision. I actually do get into things like, so why does circumcision go away, and other things don't go away in sermons, and there's important parts of what Jesus fulfilled in the law and so on. But our relationship to the law is huge. And so when you see this obedience in post acceptance of Jesus, it's not the obedience of, oh, I have to do that to be a part of this or to be accepted. It's, well, that's how I would please him. That's how I would honor my Father. That's how I would flourish,
right?
Because it's good. Things of that. Your relationship to it is utterly changed. And so that's where in James, and even I think in Paul, you can discern someone's relationship to the Father according to if they have a desire to please him or not.
Right.
Someone has no desire to please God, they must not have had this relational change.
Right.
And anyway, thoughts on that?
No, I think that's good. I'm sorry, I got a little distracted and was thinking about your theology of Galatians and what it might do to some of the passages in there that would get you in trouble. But anyway, that's a whole different other conversation.
And you could go listen to all the sermons and we could talk about that.
But that's a whole different thing. So I agree with you. And the other things I was thinking about as you were talking is, at a core, what you're saying and what I believe to be true, you find this in Romans. You find this in Bob Dylan. You find it in somebody. You
got to serve somebody. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, you got to serve somebody. But that, I think ultimately, if you take what I was saying earlier, this is a gift that comes through death and resurrection. When my wife, when I'm giving something out of love, it's transformative. Yes. I don't just throw it aside. In fact, it's built in love. And so when you are in love with someone, you begin to live in the rhythms of that person as much as that person lives in the rhythms of you. And so when you're living in the rhythms of the creator of the universe, you don't continue in sin. That doesn't mean you don't sin. Mm-hmm. It means that you are moving in a direction that is of love within the context of that relationship. And if it's a child, then maybe there are more structured rules. Mm-hmm. Like, you gotta put your hand in your lap when you eat. You can't just chew with your mouth open. These are things that your parents are teaching you so that you can interact in love and respect of other people. And that's true as a child of God, but you're also, Scripture tells us, let's see, I think it's in Romans 5:17 maybe, about how we're co-heirs.
Right.
And so we're not just children, we're co-heirs to the kingdom of God. So now all of a sudden, if we embrace the free gift of grace, we now are heirs to a kingdom. And
co-heirs with Christ.
Yes.
And then, that's the key piece when it comes to how did you end up here exactly? It's like, because Christ is an heir and offers you his status, essentially. But then the other thing that happens too, that and which leads to law keeping and love one anothering and obedience, is that you're co-heirs with one another, and that shapes the Christian community and should.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is, it's really, from a philosophical perspective, that's influencing people's question when it comes to this, especially people who aren't followers of Jesus, is it's who's originating morality. And so it's not morality that comes out of love. They're saying, okay, so God says I don't have to go to hell, and now he's set up a bunch of rules for me to live out my life. And that has that's not the gospel. Like, yes, the implications of having eternal life now and forevermore means that you won't live in a life of torment because you share the life of God through Christ.
And it changes your perspective on things.
Right.
So when Jesus says, be not anxious, it's like, stop being anxious or I'm not going to have anything to do with you. It's not that.
No.
It's that because of this new reality, there's no reason to be anxious.
Right.
And so what you want to lean into is the reality, the truth of the kingdom, and that will kill the anxiety.
Right.
And
I think some part of the beauty of the gospel in the answer to that question is, there is a tyranny of me being God. I mean, if you just are honest, if you're not following Jesus, you have to figure it out. And you are constantly trying to arrange your life to make things okay. And sometimes you have that and sometimes you don't. But there's such an uncertainty and burden to that. And so all Jesus is saying is, I laid my life down for you, and I'm inviting you to take all those burdens and put them on me. All of you trying to get it together, you trying to figure out your internal workings, your addictions, just put it on me. And here's my burden. And my burden is light and easy, and I'll begin to teach you how to live life. And it's not like, and here's the 17 rules, the 57 rules to getting it right. It's, okay, we're going to walk together, and we're going to live life together. And you're going to see that being in the light with me changes you completely.
Now, Eric, of course, we've read Shannon's question.
Yes.
But we'd be speculating to assume her experience or angle on this.
And she's talking in particular about non-Christians and their experience too, and giving an answer to them.
I'm sure. Or I guess maybe that is it. Or people in the church who are trying to figure this out, or both. Yeah, for sure. Since we don't have access to Shannon's journey on this, but we do know ourselves and our communities. Sure. When and how do you tend to see this question manifest itself, whether explicitly asked or not? How do you see it playing out in the lives of people, including yourself?
Well, I think just from a shepherding perspective within my community, the way I see it play out is people who, I don't actually see it with non-Christians,
right?
That I have dialogue with. I see it with younger Christians who are struggling because they've tasted Jesus, they've tasted grace, and they want to obey for the most part. They're struggling with parts of their lives, but they're in obedience, but they're really reticent to invite people into that because they don't want to make a judgment on people's lifestyles and their behaviors, and they don't want to have and I think they hear the gospel as a primary, hey, you have to change to come be part of Jesus. That some way you have to make some decisions to change. And once you've made some decisions to change, you can come to be part of the kingdom. Instead of Jesus offers a free gift, we'll work it out afterwards.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, you've mentioned that in other contexts with me, and having seen that and experienced that. And I actually gleaned that from you, and I think it's a very wise insight that entrance into the kingdom just really comes through having your eyes open to see Jesus. And so there's a lot to work out once that happens. And so people are going to be in the Christian community with all sorts of divergent thoughts and patterns and such, right? And so we have to understand that. That's a good insight. I think in our world, I've seen I think it's a pendulum swing that I see, and maybe you're describing a similar thing. And I also am not tending to hear this question from people outside of the church. I think people outside of the church are just dumbfounded that people within the church don't live by the principles that they see in the Bible. I think, and that is probably a misunderstanding sometimes of how grace works. But I tend to see that of people going, how could you be this way? You claim to follow Jesus. That coming from outside the church. And they're allowed to make that point, right? But I think that the reticence I've noticed inside the church, and often with the youthful, but not always, is that when people have come from a church background that is very controlling, where you have to get X, Y, and Z in line. Right. And they've heard of this more grace-based version. Right. And they've come to embrace that and felt some freedom in that. And usually there's a couple of behaviors that they no longer have to avoid, right? And so it could be like, I don't have to keep my vocabulary perfectly clean to be accepted by Jesus. If I slip a word here and there, right, no problem. That's a very basic one. And right. And so somebody will go, so it feels so good to know that this doesn't mean I'm unaccepted. Sure. And then they're grappling with, when they start to feel the Christian community or within the church, that there's a thing that they ought to do. And they go, whoa, that feels like the old way. That doesn't feel like grace. The Christian community saying, you need to reconcile with this person. Right. And they go, hold on. I thought I didn't have to follow your rules. Right. And that's when I tend to see that kind of thing, is where I tend to see the hiccup, where people go, wait a second. And I think that's where that change of relationship piece to me has been something I've felt the need that we need to teach. Yeah. And I would say, just because of the values and nature of the village, we don't run into that one much at all. Even with people coming, because usually people coming from other churches who end up at the village is usually this is their last shot, and they've felt so broken in so many ways that the rules don't. That's not an issue. It's the constant shame about their own choices in life. So I think that's. And then, I mean, to be honest, as we've moved out of COVID and are moving more into like seeing our community engage with people who don't know Jesus, because COVID made that a little different, a little harder for people, is that I'm really struck by, I always forget how post-Christian our world is. Yeah. But people just don't know. No. They don't know anything about the Bible. So beginning to help, or who Jesus is, or beginning to help people just enter in and figure that out. I mean, it's even pre-grace kind of conversation. Well, and I used to, or I've said this to people in regard to parenting. So there was a big grace-based parenting movement. And I said, I remember thinking, or because I had done some reading on this, thinking about it myself when I was becoming a parent. And said, grace needs a context. You can't offer someone grace when they don't understand that they need it. Right. So children need to have foundational building blocks of what is good, right, true, and so on. And then you can exhibit grace to them by, or more technically, mercy, by not bringing upon them the full extent of the law. And they can experience that mercifulness and see how good it is. But if they have never seen that the law has real demands, i.e. in your home, you're your
Right.
rules and boundaries,
Yeah.
then the grace is meaningless to them. It's just expected. It's not grace. Grace, like you said, is a costly gift. And so when they don't see that how costly it is that it's given to them, it just becomes kind of trivial. And I think that whole paradigm works out in Christianity. I think people need to see the whole story of the Bible, if you will. And there's a lot of work to do, because I'm reading Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, and he was talking about the difference between a typographical culture and a televised culture, and this was
Right.
in 85. But he was talking about just how much reading was done in earlier eras of our day, and even people who didn't believe in Christianity had usually read the Bible through a number of times and in depth. And that's no longer our situation, right? People have heard hot takes on it, mostly,
Right. Yeah.
like this one.
Hot take on the Bible. Yeah. I mean, I think if I were just to go back to reiterate to answer a question, if I had to sit across from somebody who didn't know Jesus and they're saying, okay, there's this free gift, but why do I have to, if it's free, then why do I have to do stuff?
Why do I enter into this community and have these rhythms and such?
Why do I do these things? I mean, I think I would just have to go back to the gift comes from sacrificial love. And before you even think about things you should do, you have to ponder and wrestle with if the God of the universe became man and was willing to lay his life down for you, and he's offering you a sacrificial gift of relationship and of identity. And so before you think of the I should do things, it's what would it mean to embrace this gift? What does that mean? What would the implications for you be if you took that gift? Not what are the rules. It's what is the God who created you died for you and invites you in and is not judging you or holding against you any of the things you've done, thought, or even the impulses you don't feel like you have control over. He's not. He's just inviting you to be in relationship, and to do that, he paid the price, which the one thing that I found in talking to people who don't know Jesus is that they will acknowledge that there is some deceit in them if they can't answer this question, that the things that they have done wrong does deserve some form of death. Now, they understand that death is the end. Like, you can't atone for the things you've done.
Right.
And that the only real way is to end you, which death eventually does.
And which is why some people bring it on themselves.
Right. And, people can try to get around it, but if they're just honest, they don't have to accept that Jesus died for them. But if you're honest, you know that the things you've done have no way of mending. You can't fix them.
A couple of things on that. I a long time ago had a pretty eye-opening conversation with a buddy. I was a landscaper at the time, and I had a coworker who we were talking about my church involvement and such, and he had kind of really opened the door for so what does that mean to you exactly? And I got to articulate some of the basics of the gospel, and he just looked at me and he said, "Yeah, I know I've screwed up. I know I've done all this stuff, but what bothers me is that you're telling me that I can't take care of it myself. I feel like I need to make up for it. I need to even the scales." And I had never personally felt that urge to fix it myself. Right. That's just not maybe in me and my family narrative or whatever. Right. But I realized, a lot of people, this is a repulsive idea because it takes it out of their wheelhouse, right? And then another, and this is a little different, but this is a well-known Tim Keller story, right? Because, of course, I would tell one of those. You're giving me a little eye thing that nobody can see, a little roll. No,
I like the Tim.
I know you do, but it is interesting, and this was the response of somebody who wasn't a believer. So somebody's attending his church, lady, and he'll tell this from time to time, and he's having a discussion with her, and she says something to the effect of, "This scares me, this message." And, "Whoa, why is that?" She said, "Well, if there was something I had to do to get it, I could still have a certain sense of say in the matter and control in the matter.
Right.
But if this sheer grace is real from God, then there's nothing God cannot ask of me. If it's just a sheer and utter gift of His, that changes the power dynamic between God and I in her experience. That if He is this powerful, all-giving giver, He can ask me to give my life to Him, and I'm going to have to deal with that. Right. Whereas if it's this kind of, we kind of have a deal where I do better and I'm nice to people, I still maintain a certain sense of
control.
Control. I can tell you when I follow you and when I don't.
Yeah.
And that was, and he shares that because that's a very insightful response, right? And few of us get there, but that is deep down at the core of probably what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful. I mean, I'm thankful that Shannon gave us this question to kind of ponder and wrestle through.
Yeah.
And it's cool. And I hope what we said was helpful.
Yeah, I hope so too. Feel free, Shannon. You can always say, well, you missed it. Here's what I was really hoping for. And we can do it again.
We'll try to address it again. We actually appreciate people sending us things to talk about.
We've done this a lot of times.
Yeah.
When it's weekly. I mean, not that I could have come up with some stuff this week.
Sure.
But yeah, no, it's great. It's any time.
Yeah.
All of you,
please
just keep sending the questions. This is great.
This is really good.
And Shannon, you know what this means about Shannon and Rick is not only do they listen all the way to the end.
Yeah.
Hey, that's just extra special.
It is extra special.
Because in podcast world, we know you don't have to do that.
Yeah, it's true.
We know you can just hit that little 30-second thing. So anyway, thank you for tuning in. It means a lot, especially from Canada. I know we're not huge, but to me that feels that I feel very honored.
Yeah, I think you tried to declare us as huge based on the 50 states. And
the Japan thing we used to talk about.
Yeah, you said last podcast, but 50 states and then 500 downloads last week or whatever it was.
Did I say that?
Yeah, and I was like 500 downloads, and you're like 50 states. We're nationwide. I don't even know if we're heard in all 50 states.
It's probably not. Why do we care?
We don't, because it's just something fun to chat about.
It is. It's an interesting thing. And you know when here's the truth is, you're not big when you talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
Because when you're big, it's just assumed. Yeah. So this is a good reminder for us.
My early politics. I certainly don't sit here anymore politically. But when I was 18 years old, I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh. And Rush Limbaugh had 50 stations. And he would, and that's not very big. You're pretty small. Because I think at his height, he had 400 stations.
Oh. Yeah.
So 50 is just, maybe you're in one city in each state or something like that. But he just made great jokes about it and would, make the typical listener in that state and tease them. And he just had a fun time doing it. And I think there's something fun about having that sense of, this is just a grassroots thing and we're having a good time and people are listening to us. They're like a minority in their world. And that's a cool...
Shannon, in Canada, you are part of such an exclusive group of Faith Over Breakfast listeners.
Yes. So we appreciate you. Anyway, this is a Faith Over Breakfast podcast. And
thanks for tuning in. Shannon, great question. And all of you, there still are more books to have. And so send us more questions. But the caveat we put on it still this week is you can't go to either one of our churches.
Right.
We're going to open that up in a...
I think we'll give it 3 weeks. I think 5 weeks, 5 books.
Oh, okay.
And then I think that's probably our best deal there, especially if we're getting one email a week.
Yeah. Yeah, stop the flood. It's hard to deal with the one email. But hey, we're grateful for that one email. So
we love it. Thank you.
Anyway, thanks for tuning in. And rate us on your podcast, on whatever podcast app you use. You can email us at faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com, and we will get back to you. And appreciate you.
All right. You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.